Hey, um, this video relates to the previous two that I've made on the issue of the Chinese state visit to the UK. Um, and it's partly to counter someone who have criticised me, and also to offer some sort of balance to the material that is online, because that material, i.e. the videos, seems to be really dominated by um, Chinese people who want to defend their government. So I want to create some sort of balance. Now, regarding the state visit, um, just to reiterate some of the things I was saying, I have some concerns about it, and I'm uneasy about some aspects of it. That doesn't mean I'm entirely against country-to-country cooperation. For example, I don't believe that we should just cut off all diplomacy with China. Certainly not. China is a very important country in the world, and admittedly, we do need China. That's just a fact. China needs us to some extent as well, but we need China. There's no question about it. So that's just a reality check. And I do feel that human rights groups, as much as I respect them, and I'm very much in agreement with the sort of work they do, they also need to accept that governments have difficult decisions to make, and governments need to consider trade and diplomacy. I don't think every aspect of the state visit is negative. I mean, if I've any regrets from those videos, it is solely that I may have given the impression that I'm entirely against it. I'm not. Um, of course, I want good relations with China. Not just because it's powerful, but because it's better to have good relations than bad relations, obviously. Um, and for me, I'm very much between a rock and a hard place, because as a country, I love China. Um, but I don't like the current very obvious neo-nationalism that can be seen, and I don't like the dishonesty of the Communist Party. Um, and there's a lot of other aspects which I'm not going to repeat myself in this video. But I do want to raise one issue, and that is the issue of nationalism, because a lot of people have sort of made excuses for this and tried to justify it. Um, Firstly, I think it's natural that people would be defensive of their homeland. That's human nature. If someone was attacking the United Kingdom and I thought what they were saying was unfair or inaccurate, of course I'd want to defend the UK. I think it's a very human and natural thing. But the key thing is to balance that out with objectivity. Now, to be fair, some of the Chinese people I've come across online are open-minded, and they will concede that there's many areas to improve and China's not perfect. But there are others, and I'm going to name someone because he or she has been very active. Shanghai Noon, they call themselves. Now that person is basically the archetype of the very sort of nationalist I've got little respect for. He or she goes on to every single video on this subject, every single one. They have a track record of doing this, and they slavishly defend the Communist Party and the Chinese government whilst constantly moaning about the West. This is something that's consistent. One of the main grievances I hear from a lot of overseas Chinese, not everyone, but a lot of people, is, oh, the West is always criticizing China. They're always interfering in our internal affairs, etc., etc. But they overlook the fact that actually Chinese state media is always criticizing the West. Chinese state media, directly run by the Communist Party, creates an atmosphere of jingoism. So you'll forgive me for not entirely believing Xi Jinping's words. Um, because whilst he's making the state visit at the same time, a lot of Chinese state newspapers continue to pander to national sentiments. A prime example is the Opium Wars. Now, this is something that gets brought up time and time again whenever anything to do with critique of China today um, is raised. That's interesting from several perspectives. Firstly, that was Imperial China. It was technically a different country, same land, but it was not the People's Republic of China. It was a different time, different context, different everything, in fact. And it was 170 years ago. You won't hear the same people talking about the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward. So I do resent the hypocrisy. I'm the first to admit that what we done regarding the Opium Wars is wrong. And I don't need a lesson on the fact that China historically has felt humiliated by the great powers. I'm fully aware of that, but I don't think it can constantly be used as an excuse for China's behavior today. One Chinese state-run newspaper said, "We're not going to bully the great powers the way they did with us." Um, that's ironic because that is exactly what China is doing in the Pacific region. That is the impression that China is giving, that it is bullying smaller neighbors like the Philippines, like Vietnam, like, well, Taiwan's a contentious issue. I'm not going to go there. But the point is, it's very noticeable that when China wants to display its power, and when Chinese nationalists want to talk about Chinese power, they're very keen to talk about how powerful China is. And yet, when they don't get things their own way, or when they're criticized, the rhetoric is, "Oh, poor China being bullied by the West. China's a developing country. China's, it's a victimhood mentality." Um, so this rhetoric does get a bit tiresome. My purpose with these videos is not to say that the West is perfect, far from it. Um, but it is to challenge some of the sort of thinking of nationalists. A lot of these people tend to be overseas students, and this is an area I want to be very, very careful. Why? Because I actually have friends who are Chinese overseas students. Now, I don't know how they would react in these situations. I certainly know some of them would agree with what I'm saying, some others maybe not. This is not, I don't hate people. I don't hate these people at all, but I do think they need to evaluate their behavior. In the end of the day, if you're going to fly the Chinese flag around in a Western country and, shout and rave about how much the Communist Party is misunderstood, etc., then you're going to be pigeonholed as a Communist Party stooge. If you don't want to be pigeonholed that way, then be more objective and prove that you can be more objective. And I have a challenge for you. If you really are objective, I want to know your thoughts on the young woman, the young Chinese woman at Duke University who in 2008, whilst the whole thing was going on with the Beijing Olympics, she was verbally abused, harassed, her family were threatened back home. The context of this was the torch relay. That, of course, is maybe one of the most glaring examples in recent years of Chinese nationalism abroad. We all remember those scenes of Tibet protesters clashing with pro-Beijing demonstrators in Paris and London and Seoul and elsewhere. Very unsettling scenes. From a British perspective, I remember feeling very angry at the time. Not that the tortures going through the UK, I didn't really have any issue with that, but that those guys in the blue uniforms felt that they could push around our police and kind of now I know they had a job to do to protect the torch, and there was legitimate threats from people trying to attack it. I think I've already said I think that was stupid. Attacking someone in a wheelchair holding the torch was just stupid, backfired badly. I criticised that at the time, but I also criticised the violent behaviour of those nationalists. Now, if you're going to play the victim, if you're going to say that human rights activists and Tibet protesters and so on are very disrespectful and behave in a bad way, are you going to be consistent and condemn other Chinese who use violence and harassment in other countries? Will you condemn that? Yes or no? Um, Now that young woman, I forget her name, but she wasn't even one of the demonstrators. She wasn't even pro-Tibet or anything like that. All she tried to do was be a negotiator. She tried to calm the two sides down. She sort of got into the middle. Very brave young woman. And as a result, the nationalists branded her a traitor. Her family were harassed back home. In my opinion, Duke University should have immediately expelled those students without question. Free speech does not give you the right to harass people in that way. And I was outraged by that. Now, it was a few years ago, but the issue is very topical. So My challenge to Chinese nationalists, the same people who commented on my video before, how do you justify that? I want you to specifically answer that question. Now, if you can condemn that incident, then I'll recognize that you're being open-minded. But if you don't condemn that, then that demonstrates to me that you're being incredibly close-minded and blinded by your own nationalism. Um, and you can throw back at me, oh, look at what you British done, the opening wars, etc. Here's the thing: you assume that I justify that. You assume that because I'm criticizing the behavior of certain overseas Chinese, I'm going to be defending the behavior of Britain in our history. Um, Incidentally, I don't think we always behave well overseas. The world knows the bad behavior of British football hooligans, etc. We're not exactly role models either. But we have a phrase in English: two wrongs don't make a right. So what I'm getting at here, what I'm driving at is, by all means be proud of China, but just be aware that when you behave that way in other countries, you are going to breed resentment. You're going to breed anger. And people are going to think it doesn't matter if you have little British flags as well, because in the end of the day, you have to reverse the situation. This is not 1842, this is 2015. And in the modern world, that's just not a way to behave in other countries. Incidentally, if British people were behaving bad elsewhere, I would unreservedly condemn them. So I just want to see a bit more open-minded rhetoric coming from some of these people. Another aspect is interesting. They tend to overwhelmingly be privileged. And I know that for a fact because it is the only way you can get to a Western country. Money these days counts for a lot in China, so does connections. Um, so, the people who are praising the Communist Party are those who benefit most from it. A final disclaimer. In no way am I saying that I'm against all Chinese students, not for a second. I've worked with Chinese students, I've got friends who are Chinese students, and I know many of them are intelligent, decent, open-minded people. But I also know there are others who have demonstrated a consistency to behave this way, and it does bother me. And I think that Western tolerance can go too far. I do think we're too tolerant in some respects to this sort of thing. I think we should show no tolerance to anyone who comes to this country, whether for work, study, or tourism, or whatever, and disrespects this country. We should show no tolerance to that. We should be tolerant, should be welcoming, but within reason. Otherwise, we just become foolish and we allow ourselves to be walked over. My concern is that Osborne and Cameron are so determined to make to make Britain China's number one Western partner, that they're not going to be assertive enough on these issues. That does concern me. And again, to be fair, the vast majority of overseas students just get on with their studies, they enjoy their experience, and they go home, and that's fine. There's no issues. But I am talking about the minority who behave in this way. They may be a minority, but they're pretty vocal. Um, And once again, I'm not talking about being proud of China, that's fine. I'm talking about how you do it, you know? That's the issue here. And okay, the incident at Duke University may be an extreme example, but I don't think, unfortunately, that'll be the last time we see something like that. So that's all I want to say. I'm going to leave this comment section open. If you're going to thumb down my video, at least be mature enough to explain why. If you don't like anything I'm saying, explain why. Um, I won't tolerate being slandered, saying things that I'm not saying, because I'm not anti-China at all. And that's it really. So that's all. I challenge you to justify what happened to that girl, and I want to see you be open-minded enough to condemn that. At least condemn that. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to agree with me on everything else. I'm simply saying, will you condemn the more extreme behavior? Yes or no? And for my part, I condemn those who, for example, who are said to be represent human rights or Tibet or whatever, and if on occasion they do use aggressive behavior, I don't support that. But the main aggression I've seen is from the pro-Beijing side. That's the truth.